want kicking the things out of orbit.
Oh my gosh!
One
One of the greatest fighters.
John Jones beat every champion pretty much never lived.
If Khabib gets his hands on McGregor, it's going to be a bad night.
Let's get into it.
Hello. You are listening to the Fight Night Picks Recap Show. I'm John Franklin. This week on the show, we discuss all the fights from UFC on ABC 1, Holloway versus Kattar. I will do all of this with one half of the Fight Night Picks Preview Show. Speaking, of course, of the great Matt Allen. Matt, how are you?
Doing great. Just so happy fights are back. Like, I love basketball, but there's nothing like getting excited for a big fight card. And Max Holloway, like, normally that's the top of a pay-per-view type card. So the fact that we got it on a Saturday morning, like, I was pretty hyped up for them. I was super excited. And it really paid off, too. Like, for that being ABC's first show, I don't think it could have gone off any better.
I don't think so either. We'll get into that, but I really do think they started off well. All right, listen, Matt, we usually reserve this part of the show to discuss the lead-up. I looked over the canceled bouts. There wasn't anything that crazy or exciting in there, so here's what I'd rather talk about. Let's talk about this Fight Island triple header format they're going with. We got the Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday thing. I mean, it's hell on prediction videos, I'm sure. But do you like this format, particularly given the circumstances? Do you like they kind of are rolling this thing out to start the year?
It does have a certain, like, you know, international fight week feel to it. And that is kind of nice, especially the fact that, listen, everything got canceled the first half of the year. The UFC did a pretty good job of bringing events back. And we've had our first kind of drought since the return of the UFC. So I don't know if it's me more just really desperate to watch people fight each other in a cage, but I kind of like this for the first week back. It does have a big fight feel. They're launching the ABC kind of whole network thing. They did that last night. They've got Conor fighting at the end of the week. It's just, there's a certain buzz around this week that you don't often get in January. So I'm a fan of it. Like, if they did this once, maybe twice a year, I would absolutely love it.
Yeah, I'm with you on the International Fight Week part of it. The Wednesday thing's a little bit curious for me, just because they didn't, I don't want to say they didn't stack the card, because they were expecting to have something else there. They were expecting to have Edwards and Chimaev. And if they had Edwards and Chimaev, this would have been a home run. So they can't help, you know, that Chimaev got COVID and everything got thrown for a loop. So, you know, again, I like that they did this. It would have been an absolute home run had it went off the way it was initially going to go off, but I still like it. All right, let's get to the main event. Matt, when Max Holloway sat on Santa's lap, he told him all he wanted was a trilogy fight with Alexander Volkanovski. Why? Because he's telling everyone else that, and Santa Claus is probably the only one that could make it happen for him. And then along came Calvin Kattar, riding only a 2-fight win streak, but those 2 fights were statement fights. Knocked Jeremy Stephens dead in 2 rounds, and then was all over Dan Ige for 5. Showing he could finish a name fighter and fight at championship length. On Saturday night, he had the chance to do both against Max Holloway, and the fight was Max's throughout. It read a unanimous decision, 2 50-43s and a 50-42. I'll use a racing analogy here, Matt. Max treated the Indy 500 like it was a drag race. He floored it and never took his foot off the gas. He blasted Kattar throughout, and then late he kind of punked him just to show how dominant he was. So that's what I saw. What'd you see?
That might be the best singular performance I've ever seen in UFC history. And I understand recency bias. It's a real thing. But, like, he put up Wilt Chamberlain-esque numbers. Like, if you ever go back and you read what Wilt Chamberlain was able to do in basketball games, now granted, he was playing against a bunch of, like, garbage men and other people who didn't really understand the sport, but he was putting up like 50, 30s, and 20s. And those were the type of stats that Holloway put out. I remember right at the end of the fight, they said that he fell 1 significant strike short of setting his own record against Ortega. And I was like, well, that's weird. It seems like he landed a lot more. And then, of course, after the event, the official statistics came out and they were like, no. He didn't only break his record. There was so much of a discrepancy between these two that he would have set the record just by the amount, like the difference between their strikes. That's the amount that Holloway put on Kattar. And it was a weird fight. And maybe I'm in the minority in this. I hope I'm not, though. They definitely should have stopped that fight before the end of it. I did not expect that to go to the scorecards, especially in the second round. Holloway's really starting to pour it on him then. And I'm like, okay, it's just kind of a matter of time at this point. In the third round, to Kattar's credit, he did well, I would say, but we're kind of grading this a little bit different. When I'm saying he did well, that was probably the one round he didn't get 10-8'd in. And then it just kept on getting worse and worse. For me, and I'm not a coach, it's not like, I'm sure his coaches know him better than I do. But if you're Calvin Kattar, after that 4th round, like, your only chance to win at this point is to knock out a man who's never been knocked out and who has fought basically everyone from his era. If I'm a coach in that situation, I'm probably going to throw in the towel. Just once it gets to a certain point where you don't really see your fighter coming back, and Kattar was still landing enough, I guess, if you really want to make that argument. But it just got to a certain point. Max, I throw elbows now Holloway. Just when he got him up against the cage and started landing that overhand elbow over and over and over again, it was just like, okay, we can probably stop this fight, whatever. But one of the best singular performances I've ever seen. And it's weird too, and we've talked about this before, how like with Gaethje and Ferguson, people are like, oh, that's such a great fight. That's such a great fight. It's not. Let's be honest. If you want to make that your fight of the night, to give the loser $50K, just to sort of be like, hey, your toughness carried you through to this, I understand that 100%. But I don't really see that as a fight of the night. Like at the end of the year awards this year, I'm not going to be thinking, oh, was Holloway Kattar fight of the night? It's more like, wow, Holloway won that really, really one-sided beatdown.
Yeah, I think that sometimes, and we've gotten into this before, and I've certainly gotten into it, Craig, about this whole thing of rewarding guys who can just take punches. And here's a guy who can effectively get his ass whipped, so we're going to give him 50 grand just because he's got a chin on him. So I'm with you on that. I guess the case, I mean, would you rather have Condit and Brown been the fight of the night? I don't know. I get where you're coming from. To reward Max and not potentially take. So here's what ends up happening. In the end, yeah, you give Calvin Kattar 50 grand he doesn't deserve, but the alternative would be giving Condit and Brown 50 grand each, and then one of these younger fighters who got paid losing their bonus. So from that perspective, I do like that they went with the fight of the night, and they're probably just trying to keep Kattar in good graces and have him, be happy despite what went down. So here's my takeaway from it. Really the big takeaway. And we'll spin this forward to the Volkanovski thing, because obviously the elephant in the room is, did Max earn another shot at Alex with his win? I just never saw Calvin establish any respect. The only way I've seen Max Holloway get beaten is he has to be made to pay for coming forward. And that's because that's what he's going to do. So if he comes forward, you got to crack him. I think Alex did. I think Connor did when they fought. So I think that, to me, is the way that you got to establish a little bit of respect with the kid. Now, we can get into a whole nother conversation about because Max was getting nasty towards the end with those elbows. I think he wanted to finish. So I'll give that to him, that he was kind of finish hunting. And, but at the same time, some of that stuff where he's punking him, I don't know if it was worse than holding up Brian Ortega's hands or not worse than that. I don't know where I fall on that. But let me ask you this. Talk to me a little bit about some of the theatrics Max was doing, and then spin it forward. If you think this performance earned him another shot at Volkanovski?
So again, another basketball reference, because I almost have to do this every 5 minutes, it feels. It felt a lot like the fifth round of that fight was when, do you remember the really famous alley-oop when Dwayne Wade passed it up to LeBron, and LeBron put poor Jason Terry on an absolute poster? And that was the year after, of course, Jason Terry went off on LeBron in the playoffs. That's really what it felt like to me. Like, Max Holloway has done nothing for the last year, just hearing, okay, you've lost 2 close fights. You're no longer the best anymore. Like, you're past your prime and you're no longer at the top. And he's just waiting. He's like, okay, just let me get my chance. Let me get my chance. Let me get my chance. And it was the perfect matchup for him too. And I kind of like what he had done. And Max Holloway, to his credit, achieved viral success. There was a tweet that came out. I just saw it this morning. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of likes it has now, but this morning there was a tweet out there and it was just him doing that. I'm the best boxer in the UFC, hitting Kattar, looking like he was in the Matrix. Had 120,000 likes this morning. That's not something you see in MMA all that often. That's like Joaquin Buckley level fame. And yes, the Buckley, that one might have gotten more views, but for Max Holloway, who's already a fairly established name, to go out there and not just put on a good fight, he put on a show. And the casual viewer on ABC, they're probably not all that involved in MMA. Like, I had a lot of friends text me last night, like, man, like, tell me more about Holloway, tell me more about Kattar. And these are people who are actually like somewhat into the sport. So I think the fact that Holloway not only put on a great fight and really showed what MMA is at the highest level, the fact that he did add such an entertainment aspect to the fight just really boost his profile. And going into the Volkanovski fight off that, if I'm Volkanovski, why wouldn't you want to fight Holloway? Because in my mind, if I'm Alexander Volkanovski, I've already beat him twice. Now he's way more famous than he was. He just had pretty much the most impressive performance he could have. And again, yeah, you beat him twice. So why would you not accept that trilogy fight? To me, that's a little odd. And again, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, well, he's scared or anything like that. That's ridiculous. Of course, Alexander Volkanovski isn't. But just it's been really weird how Volkanovski's handled this whole thing. It's not often a champ has the ability to call out a challenger who has more fame than they do. And Volkanovski's in that position against a guy he's already beat twice. So I'm not badly saying Volkanovski. Not that I'm looking past Brian Ortega, but I'm welcoming this third fight.
Yeah, I agree. And the one thing I would like to have fans sort of pump the brakes a little bit on is this idea that because of Max's performance last night, that changes who Alexander Volkanovski is. Listen, guys, they call him Alexander the Great, not Alexander the Very Good. This kid is legit, and he went with Max. You know, I mean, Max was just as ready for those two fights as he was for the fight last night. Just because he looked better doesn't all of a sudden change the title picture at 145 pounds. It may give him some leverage towards getting that fight, but it doesn't necessarily mean the outcome is going to be different. I mean, that's what Max does. Now, does he do it to the extent that he did it last night? Well, nobody does it to the extent that he did it last night. It's like, you know, Kobe's great, but there was one night he put up 81. It was a different night
against
all the other nights.
Raptors.
Right. Yeah. But you know, the example would be he didn't put up 81 against LeBron. He put up 81 against the Raptors. And I'm not calling Calvin Kattar the Raptors. I'm just saying that, you know, take this with a grain of salt. Now, as far as the punking, I don't know. Sometimes I think if you're Kattar, you just got to say, listen, this is his night. He's going to do what he's got to do. It's kind of like what I respect about when Dominic Cruz got, you know, punked by Cody Garbrandt. He just said, listen, man, the guy was putting on me. He gets to do what he wants to do in there. So you're for this fight. You're for the Volkanovski Holloway.
100%. And I'm going to be honest. I know we're a pick show. We're going to be doing a very long prediction about that fight if it comes out. I like this version of Max. And I know you kind of said, yes, he had done it against Kattar and not against Volkanovski. But if that same aggressive Max Holloway fights Volkanovski, after what we saw, and again, I'm not a Holloway stan by any means. Definitely thought he won that second fight. Definitely thought he lost the first one, though. So in my mind, they are one apiece, and they pretty much fight each other to a draw 10 times out of 10. Like Holloway, a little bit better at striking. I would say Volkanovski a little bit better at grappling. But what Volkanovski can do defensively on the feet sort of makes up for that difference. But if Holloway has in his mind, this is all I have to do. I need to be aggressive. No one can keep up with my gas tank on a good day. And if I'm putting it on you constantly, landing shots to the body, landing shots to the head, making you move, there's no one in the world who could last 5 rounds, excuse me, against that version of Max Holloway. And for Volkanovski, it's weird, and I can fully admit this. I don't have a very good judgment as to how good Alexander Volkanovski is. Like, in my head, he's still that, not to use the word brawler, but he is still that brawling type fighter who fought Chad Mendes not that many years ago. And now he's so much more refined, and his fight IQ is at such a high level that I have a really hard time placing sort of where Volkanovski is in my pound for pound argument, but I think that's a phenomenal fight. And again, if you're Volkanovski, you beat him twice. That's what you tell everyone. Why would he not accept the third fight? It doesn't make any sense to me why he wouldn't. I understand they want to give Ortega the first chance at the title, but in my mind, you do Ortega Volkanovski, and the second that is done, I don't care who wins, you have to get Max in there, and he has to be fighting for a title in his next fight.
Yeah, and the other thing you got to think about when it comes to Max is, and this is not wishing any ill on the kid, but it's like, you know, you see somebody and you say, this guy's not long for the world, you know, is a reckless person. The way he fights, I mean, he's 29, but he's been fighting since he was really young. And he's taken as much, I can't remember who tweeted it. Someone said, in as much, might have been Snowden, in as much as he's given a lot of damage, he's taken a lot of damage. You know, he gets hit to hit. You know, he's willing to make that trade-off. So he's taken a lot of damage for a guy as young as he is. So who knows if he can continue this into his late 30s? Probably not. So, you know, you got to strike while the iron's hot. All right, real quick. Michael Carroll, who is at MJC Flipped a Script, who's a researcher for the UFC, he tweeted a lot of like records that were broken last night. I'm going to go through them quickly. Listening, if you're in the car, even looking at this on YouTube might be hard to follow, so I'll try and keep it as relatively simple as I can. All right, so first and foremost, by fight, significant strikes, the previous record was 290. Max had 445. Total strikes, the previous record was 361. Max had 447. Significant attempts, the previous record was 515. Max had 744. Total attempts, the previous record was 541. Max had 746. Distance strikes landed. Previous record was 281. Max had 439. So he's shattering his records. As far as the total strikes, in terms of the fight between the two of them, significant strikes landed 578. Previous record was 400. And significant strikes attempt 1,000. 1027 they attempted last night. Previous record was 859. Total strikes landed. Previous record was 449. The new record's 581. Total strikes attempted. The previous record was 957. New record's 1,030. And the biggest of all, with his 447 total strikes landed, Max passed George St. Pierre last night. He's now in first place, 2,805 strikes landed, which is incredible. And somebody said something. The craziest stat I saw was somebody said something like Max Holloway accounts for like 1% of the strikes in the UFC in the time that he fought. Something like that. It was interesting.
Max Holloway's style is the last one I would want to fight. Like, I would rather fight Francis Ngannou than Max Holloway. Because if Francis, you're getting hit once, you're going to have a nap. It honestly doesn't even sound that bad. With Max Holloway, you're just getting beat and punked and made fun of for 25 straight minutes. And it doesn't get easier. Like, I feel like with a fighter's mindset, if they have a bad first round, it's like, okay, I at least got over that. And now it's new round, new me almost. With Max Holloway, you've definitely watched his fights before. You're familiar with who he is. And you know, okay, I lost round 1. Well, round 2, he's probably going to do the same thing. And round 3, he's going to be there too. And same thing for 4 and 5. The fact that he can weaponize his pace to such a degree is just terrifying for most other guys in that featherweight division.
Yeah, and it's almost like it's worse that he's not a finisher. With all due respect, I mean, because you know you're going to get your ass whipped for 5 rounds. Because at this point, he's been a champion for so long, he's going to be fighting 5-round fights. I mean, unless he's like way in the twilight of his career and they're using him to promote somebody else. So listen, I got the BJ Penn shirt on today. I'll show it to you guys real quick. I'm going to ask you a question that's almost blasphemy. How closer are we to him supplanting BJ as the Hawaiian legend? I mean, this guy's putting on, he's building a body of work that you could argue is better than BJ's. So do you think that he's in that discussion yet?
You have to look at it through 2 different lenses, I think. And again, when you look, Wilt Chamberlain's a good example. Is what Wilt Chamberlain able to do on a basketball court more important or better than what Kevin Durant was, just because Wilt Chamberlain's numbers look insane? Well, yeah, he was able to put up crazy numbers, but he wasn't really doing it against the highest level of competition because back then the sport wasn't what it is now. It's just the people who you were fighting aren't the full-time fighters, if you will, like Max Holloway has to fight. I would just say the overall level of competition or just the overall skill in the UFC has definitely raised since the heyday of BJ Penn. And the fact that BJ Penn did go on such a long losing streak near the end of his career, I think that tainted him more than anything Max Holloway could do. Because if BJ had just left like George St. Pierre, then no one's ever going to remember you as, oh, remember that guy who was great and then he got knocked out a bunch of times and didn't really look like the same fighter. With GSP, like, he's just a beloved Canadian figure now up here. Because he never had that really crushing end to his career, where Holloway, unless he has a similar fate one day, you look at who he's beat the Jose Aldo. So he's beaten guys in the GOAT conversation. He's beaten former champs, and he's setting records too in the UFC. Stuff that, and no offense, BJ Penn, no one's really been able to do the stuff that Max Holloway is doing. So I do think Holloway, if he hasn't taken that yet, he's well on his way. I just don't see how Max Holloway can get any bigger in Hawaii. Because I know, being a Canadian MMA fan, Max Holloway is one of the biggest stars up here. So I could just imagine how famous he is over in Hawaii.
Here's where the conversation gets weird for me, is that BJ Penn is a 2-weight champion, and most people view his career as he underachieved. Like, he won the belt at 70, won the belt at 55, and he underachieved because realistically there was a lot of big fights that he lost. You know, some because he just ran into GSP, some because he was past his prime when he fought Nick Diaz. But for Holloway, it's almost like one of those weird things, like with LeBron. Like, you look at LeBron almost like he's underachieving. I mean, he's got all these finals appearances, he's got all these rings. He's probably going to end his career as the all-time leading scorer, and yet there's still people that try and poke holes in his legacy. So I think it's a discussion for another day, but it's interesting. I mean, 1, who has the heart of Hawaii, and 2, who's probably the better fighter historically. All right, let's move on to the co-main event, Matt. There was a time when a fight between the natural-born killer Carlos Condit and the immortal Matt Brown would have been fight of the night for sure. That time is not now. But at their age, for what many perceive them to have left in the tank, they put a pretty good fight together. Both fighters working on the ground and on the feet. The decision read 30-27s all around for Condit. I thought it was a little closer than that. What'd you think?
I'd love to get your perspective of it. I thought it was 29-28 Condit. I gave him round 2 and round 3. And honestly, round 1 for Brown, I understand why he was upset. He went on Twitter quite a bit later on in the evening and just kind of voiced his displeasure with the judges. But if you're Matt Brown, okay, round one, it's hard to say you won that round. I understand he was able to get the takedown. He didn't do anything with it, though. And I'm a big believer of takedowns are only worth so much if you're not able to get any offense off with them. Like, if Matt Brown, let's say, went for a guillotine, but he wasn't able to get it, but at least the attempt was there. Like, that counts for points in my mind. Whereas me just taking down Carlos Condit, guy's sort of notorious for not being able to defend takedowns, but not doing anything with it. It was disappointing. Like, Matt Brown's got some of the better elbows really in UFC history. I expected a little bit more out of him. We saw a little bit of it in the third round, kind of as the fight was ending. He had got top position there, but I thought it was clear Condit number 2. Round 3 was close, but I still had it for Condit personally. And again, I can't stress just how excited I was for this fight. Like, this was the fight I was looking forward to most this week, other than Dustin versus Conor. I love the natural born killer, and I love Matt Brown. And the fact that they were still able to put on a fairly entertaining and competitive fight at this stage in their career, I thought was really nice to see.
Yeah, I don't think that it was one for the ages, but I thought it was pretty good. Like, I thought that, it's not something where we're talking about 5 years or 10 years, unless we're talking about one of the fighters. But, yeah, like I said, I thought it was a pretty good fight. And again, I didn't read any of Matt Brown's Twitter stuff, but I guess my question would be, is he complaining that it was 30-27, or does he think he won? Because like you said, okay, so if the third round's a toss-up, I can see his argument from this perspective. If we're calling the third round a toss-up, and you and I both agree he took the first, then yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of an argument there. But again, and I hate to just say don't leave it in the hands of the judges, but he had some moments where, I could have seen more from him. So I get that. I think that he was probably doing the math in his head and saying, I controlled enough of the third, won the first. I get it. So let's kind of spin this thing forward. Do you think, we talk about Carlos Condit, do you see Michael Bisping, do you see Randy Couture in the sense that maybe he has a late career run and you put him in there with, I'm trying to think of like who the guys are. Like, I mean, would you hate a Stephen Thompson, Carlos Condit fight? I mean, would that be something where either one of those guys can be at a, don't you think they're at a career crossroads? Both of them?
Wonder Boy almost murdered Jeff Neal like a month ago.
That's fair.
And Jeff Neal's like really, really good, and he's a primary striker. I'm kind of surprised I got this question. No, Wonder Boy destroys Condit. I do think that there is a way, though, to match him up, kind of like they did with Bisping, where it was, I'm kind of down in the ranks. Let's give me Silva. He's still up in the ranks. Okay, I beat Silva. Well, now number 3. There's a pretty good excuse to get me in there. I do think you could play that kind of favorable matchmaking game. My issue is, if you put him in there with one even semi-okay wrestler, they're going to beat him. It's just, the game plan is out there on how to beat Carlos Condit. And Craig and I were both pretty impressed with how Condit's grappling looked in that fight. It was the first fight where I felt like he was actually somewhat aggressive with his grappling. Because normally with Carlos Condit, it's, I've got this weird wonky striking, and then you're going to take me down. We're not going to see any weird wonky striking. And at the top of that division, right now you have Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman, and Gilbert Burns. I'd argue 3 of the better grapplers ever. And the fact that that's such an Achilles heel for Carlos Condit, I don't think he has it in him. It hurts me to say, because I do think Condit, to me last night or yesterday, he put on one of those performances that says, I'm not washed, I'm just not in my prime. Like, I think that was a win that says Carlos Condit shouldn't only be matched up with other guys near the end of their careers. Like, I wouldn't mind seeing Carlos Condit against some up and comers. Daniel Cormier had the worst recommendation ever. After the fight, he was like, yeah, he was talking about Vicente Luque. One of the last fights I want to see is Carlos Condit fight Vicente Luque. That would not end well for Carlos Condit at all. But there are still fun matchups out there. And I think it's interesting, too, with that being Condit's last fight on his contract. I know White had come out in the post-fight press conference, and he was like, oh, I didn't know that. Weird thing not to know. You're the president. But also, he was like, oh, no, we really like Carlos. Like, Carlos, my guy. He's no G. He was saying all the right things, which makes me think one of two things are going to happen. They either cut Matt Brown and use the money that they're saving from his contract, and they're going to re-sign Carlos Condit, or Condit walks like Pettis did, and he'll either do the PFL, he could do the Bellator. Nowadays, it's so hard to predict where guys are going to go in free agency, because at least there are a few different options. But I'd never thought I'd say this. I think we saw the last of the natural born killer in the UFC.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I understand. To be honest, I forgot about the Jeff Neal performance that Wonder Boy had. I guess what I was just thinking was, as these guys start to wind down their career, and Michael Bisping was the beneficiary of really the most ultimate path, right? He had a grudge match with Luke Rockhold. He had a guy that fell out, right? He really didn't earn the fight with Rockhold. He just because there was beef between the two of them, he was able to slide into that position. And then, lo and behold, he wins the belt. So I guess in my brain, I was trying to think of, okay, who's near Carlos Condit's situation? Not necessarily, I'm not trying to explain it was a stupid question. I'm not trying to explain it away. I'm just saying that I'm trying to find the path for him to something more than just because I mean, I didn't ask the question effectively in that it should have been an either or situation, which is there a path to him or is it the Legends division from here on out? So it's looking like the Legends division, but I think what you're kind of contending here is that maybe it's just another organization. So I'm going to ask you the same thing about Carlos Condit that I was going to ask you about Matt Brown in a different way. Do these seem like the kind of guys, Matt Brown specifically, but we can include Condit in this as well, that just ultimately just lay their gloves down in a UFC octagon and go open a gym? Or do you think that they're going to keep trying to find the next fight? Because Matt Brown's got bare knuckle written all over him. So,
yeah.
Right? So do you think these guys are just like, listen, I had a good career in the UFC. That's where I want to end it. I'm a UFC fighter. Is there anything to, and I guess a lot of it comes down to how they handle their finances, but is there anything to just walking away on the UFC roster and at least being able to say I ended on my terms as a UFC fighter as opposed to nickel and diming the PFL and Bellator?
It's weird too, because these are two guys who have both kind of already retired before. Like Condit feels like he's retired after every single one of those losses. After Maya, I'm going to take some time off, and then he comes back and fights Neil Magny. And then after the Oliveira loss, he decides to take more time off and then comes back. For Condit, again, I don't feel like he has to be stuck to just a Legends division. If Condit just went to Bellator, and let's say they did Carlos Condit versus Jason Jackson next, I'd be all for it. Just I don't want to see him in there with the elite of the elite in the UFC. And it's no knock on Bellator because, like, I don't want to see him fight Douglas Lima either because Lima destroys him. But I do think that there are competitive matchups out there for him. It does matter what organization he goes to, because if I look at Carlos Condit, his style does not fit with the PFL at all. The PFL's roster is 98% wrestlers, and just stylistically, it wouldn't end very well for poor Condit. Over in Bellator, though, like, okay, let's say you saw a commercial and it was Benson Henderson fighting Carlos Condit. Like, that's the most Bellator fight, but it's definitely one that would get me intrigued. Yeah. So Matt Brown, it's funny you had said it too. I had in my notes, mentioned Matt Brown should fight Thiago Alves and bare knuckle. I think that's the next matchup for him. Like, Thiago Alves brings a fight, is a bare knuckle boxer, and then I'll share a common opponent, Carlos Condit. It's almost too perfect of a matchup to do. Although I agree with you, for Matt Brown, more specifically, I would like to see him retire and become a coach. I've always kind of thought that for Matt Brown. I think he's got a good mind for the sport. And I always like guys like Matt Brown who become coaches. I don't want you to be a 4-time world champion and then be my coach. I want you to be like a Mike Brown for American Top Team. Like Mike Brown, he was the WEC champ. He accomplished quite a bit in his career, but it's not like he is on a Mount Olympus, if you will, or a Mount Rushmore for like top MMA fighters you think of. But no, those are the guys who are in the gym every single day who just have such a great mind for the sport. And I do think that Matt Brown is a guy who, whenever he does decide to retire, whether it's in the UFC or outside the UFC, that is a great thing that he should be doing after he's done. Because I don't see Matt Brown being a desk guy for ESPN or anything, but him opening a gym, I think, is the ideal next step.
And I think maybe opening that gym is helped more by ending your career in the UFC and not sort of just like hanging on. All right, man, let's move on. Santiago Ponzinibbio is back, and according to MMA pundits, myself included a little bit, he's kind of got this like he's Derrick Rose or some shit, like he's got this mystique that's definitely grown in his absence. He drew Li Jingliang in his return bout, who, for being honest, doesn't knock you on your ass with his resume. A distance loss to Neil Magny. So on paper, this is the guy to give Ponzinibbio, right, to get his sea legs back. He wipes him out and then starts the path back to Kamaru Usman, who he was scheduled to fight one at a time. But not so fast, my friends. Fights are not fought on paper, and Jingliang separated Ponzinibbio from consciousness at 4:25 of the very first round. So, Matt, did you think that this was Ponzinibbio just not being ready? Did he underestimate Li Jingliang? Was it a bad matchup? What are your thoughts on this fight?
I think the term I used going into that fight was Ponzinibbio will destroy him, and this is not going to be a competitive fight. Now, I know that's normally a portion later on in the show of when I have to take my L.
You were half right. It wasn't a competitive fight.
Oh, no, it wasn't in the slightest. And there was a beautiful left hook that Jingliang landed like over the shoulder. Just a beautiful strike. Li Jingliang's always been odd, and there was a weird stat out there. If you look back before this fight, he's never lost in China, but he had never won outside of China. It's an odd stat, make of it what you will, but he's always been one of those guys in my mind. He can put on an exciting fight no matter who you match him up there with. He can give good guys hard fights, but ultimately he normally will fall short. And if you give him just, a run-of-the-mill, like guy off Contender Series or something, he will beat them. He's one of the more established top 20 guys. He's not going to jump out at you, but if you give him, Alessio Zaleski dos Santos is really the fight that stands out in my mind. Craig got married that day, and that was the co-main event to Jessica Andrade versus Rose Namajunas. And Alessio, who I was a big fan of, I still am, nicknamed Capoeira, knocked out Sean Strickland with a spinning back kick. I'm a big fan. He went out there and dominated Alessio, and it wasn't even a competitive fight. He drops him in the first, he overwhelms him in the second, then knocks him out in the third. And I guess for me, ever since that performance just really stood out in my mind, and we talked about these in the prediction videos, every now and then, win, lose, or draw, a fighter will have a performance that I just can't separate from them. Like Gavin Tucker to me will never be, not say he won't be more, but that loss to Rick Glenn, no matter what he ever does for the rest of his career, that's always going to be the first thing I think of. And it's terrible to admit, but for Ponzinibbio, I'm like, okay, at the time that he did get all those injuries, supposed to fight Usman, I thought he was going to beat Usman at the time. I shouldn't have said that, but it was true. I was really high on Santiago Ponzinibbio. And I don't think it was ring rust. I just think at a certain point, listen, you're out for that long, you have that many injuries. I guess call it ring rust if you will, but you can only take so much time off in this sport. And some people try to prove that you can and can't. Dominic Cruz has a lot of weird theories about it. But for Ponzinibbio, he fought a guy who stylistically was a good matchup for him, who will try to get into those longer exchanges with him. He just seemed quite hesitant from the beginning. So I don't know if for Ponzinibbio, it was just he wasn't all that prepared for the specific opponent, or if Li Jingliang might just have bricks in his hands. It could be easy as that. Like anyone could get knocked out at 170 with one strike. But I was so confident in Ponzinibbio going into that I couldn't have been more surprised by an outcome on the whole entire card.
Yeah, and here's the thing for me. Sometimes the ideal situation for the UFC and MMA in general is when two guys fight, the winner takes whatever the loser had and moves forward, right? My problem with this fight is I feel like we lost more in Ponzinibbio than we're going to gain in Jingliang. It's not like whatever we thought about. I mean, listen, you had Ponzinibbio potentially beating Kamaru Usman once upon a time. It's not like all of a sudden you feel that much better about Li Jingliang because of this win. So I guess my question is this a case of Anthony Pettis against Clay Guida where a fighter just kind of slept on a guy? In Ponzinibbio's case, he got put to sleep, but he's got a good enough resume where you just say, all right, man, that was a mulligan. You had a bad night. You were out for a while, and he still gets a quality opponent next time out? Or has he sort of been correct? Has he been a little bit leveled out by the competition now? Like has he settled, or should he get another opponent next time out?
Is Nico Price too perfect of an opponent next?
You guys put Nico Price in every fight you can. I love it.
Because I understand that not every fighter can be champion. And I think Nico Price understands that too. Like, I don't think Nico Price wakes up every morning like, I'm going to go knock out Kamaru Usman. But I think Nico Price wakes up every morning. He's like, I can put on a ton of exciting fights no matter who you match me up there with. And Ponzinibbio, a guy who was in a main event, who had that number next to his name, Nico Price has fought higher level competition. Of course, he got KO'd by Luque twice. That would be a fun fight. And again, I've got to mention Vicente Luque too, probably my favorite unranked fighter just ever. His striking and Santiago's striking is very similar. So if Ponzinibbio is going to play that wait counter game, he might be able to have more success against a guy like Luque, who isn't just that, I'm just going to kind of cruise forward style. The only issue is your chin doesn't get better. And Ponzinibbio doesn't have a bad chin by any means, but that did worry me, the Jingliang knockout loss. I've seen Ponzinibbio eat like massive strikes from people before. The only TKO loss he had before this last one was to Lorenz Larkin like 6 years ago. And Lorenz Larkin, if you're not watching Bellator, I guess he didn't fight this past year, but Lorenz Larkin is one of the best fighters in the world. He knocked out Neil Magny. So he put it on Ponzinibbio, but after that, Ponzinibbio normally could eat really big shots and just walk through them. And Li Jingliang, he has knockout wins. It was just odd to me. That fight, again, maybe I was sleeping on Li Jingliang, but that whole fight was just very weird to me. I would like to see Ponzinibbio in there with one of those fringe top 15 guys. Maybe just give him one of those all excitement type of fights. Don't give him a, who's a bad matchup for him. I don't want to see him fight Gilbert Burns next. I don't want to see him fight Tyron Woodley. Like maybe Woodley, if you want to do who's more washed at this point in their career. But I do think you give Ponzinibbio someone with a decent amount of respect just because you know what he is capable of on his best day. But I don't want to see him in there with a top 15 guy next.
Here's what I think is amazing, and this is not to poke holes in what you're saying here, but I'm just curious. No, there's no world in which you would accept Carlos Condit fighting Vicente Luque, who just won and looks pretty good against Matt Brown. But you would have Ponzinibbio, who just got knocked dead, fight Luque. That's interesting to me. Would you have a problem with Ponzinibbio fighting Condit?
Yeah, because again, Condit, I know how to beat him. Like, if I, Matt Allen, can sit here on my couch and tell you how to beat Carlos Condit, shoot a double leg. He has terrible wrestling defense. It's almost too well known at this point. Whereas Ponzinibbio, I know that you lost by knockout in your last fight, and Luque won by knockout in his last fight. With Condit, the script is out there for him. And with these two fighters, especially Luque, Luque gives you phenomenal Muay Thai. He walks forward with his hands high, and he just does a lot of really good basic striking fundamentals. Ponzinibbio lost Li Jingliang, but he also knocked out Neil Magny. Carlos Condit fought Neil Magny and kind of got Neil Magny'd by him. So for me, Condit, I would like to see him fight unranked guys who have big names or fight up-and-comers who haven't established themselves yet. With Ponzinibbio, you have one bad loss. With Condit, he had 6 in a row, and then he's looked okay as of late. But even the wins, Court McGee, Matt Brown, it's not like Carlos Condit's beating guys in their prime right now. Those would all be fun fights, though.
No, for sure, I agree with you. I just think that my only pushback would be that if Carlos Condit's takedown defense were as bad as you're representing it, I think he would have lost last night. So he did represent himself okay in spots, but I'm with you. Here's what I think you should do with Carlos Condit. Not to get back to him, just really quickly. Maybe he gets a fight he doesn't even deserve. Maybe he fights Tyron Woodley just because it's a poster fight and they're both towards the end of their career. And like you said,
I don't mind that. That's a good shit.
Yeah, maybe that's where we go. All right.
That's a good idea.
You know, Matt, when you've been watching MMA as long as I have, you start to notice trends or at least familiar narratives. One of them is the guy who has a highlight finish, one they become known for, and that becomes what is expected of them. Now, what normally happens is they crumble under that pressure and never realize the potential, or it's short-lived. Think Uriah Hall on Tough, Barbosa against Terry Adam, just to name a few. And those guys have kind of managed to patch together good careers. But now we have Joaquin Buckley. He drew Alessio Di Chirico on Saturday night and zigged when he should have zagged and got put on to Chirico's highlight reel. Knocked out at 212 in the very first round. Matt, is it as simple as saying, like I said, he zigged when he should have zagged, or did you see more? Was this kid out of his depth?
So I think you're half right. I think he only zigs, if that makes any sense. Joaquin Buckley, to me, has a fundamental issue with his head movement. And I swear I was just about to text Craig this right before it happened. I said, I think Chirico might stop him. Because what Buckley does is, Dado Cormier, John Jones, he talked about it a lot in press conferences. DC has a really big problem where when he wants to evade punches, he always goes to his left. It's just a natural position for him. With Buckley, every single time he goes to throw a strike, he's either ducking or he's doing the same thing, shifting to the left. And I noticed it over and over and over again. Every single time he would step into range to try to engage, he does that duck. And of course, I didn't think he was going to get head kicked by Di Chirico in the first round, but it was something that was so obvious early on in the fight that it's a little concerning. And I thought Buckley was going to win. I thought he looked good after his last performance. And beating Ipa Kasanganay, I understand the way he did it was ridiculous, but just beating Kasanganay, I thought was really impressive. And I look more towards Buckley's loss against Kevin Holland than I did anything else. Even against Kevin Holland, I thought Buckley did all right. Yes, he gets knocked out in the third, but he's at least pressing the action. He's really aggressive, and he's landing good shots throughout that fight. Yes, so he ends up losing that. Then he gets one of the greatest knockouts ever in Ipa Kasanganay. And the Jordan Wright fight, the one right after that, was the one I was a little concerned. I'm like, okay, if he's ever going to sort of fold under all the expectations, it would be this fight. And he went out there and passed with flying colors. And it's not like Jordan Wright's the highest level guy in the world, but the fact that he sort of got that I'm a viral star monkey off my back really meant something to me. So I thought this performance, it was going to be less about the crazy Matrix knockout and more just about this is a really top level prospect that we have. It's weird too, because Di Chirico, you say his highlight reel, that might be the only thing on his highlight reel. That might be the shortest video on YouTube. So it's weird. They gave him a guy who's not really known for finishing, who was on a 3-fight losing streak, and everything was pointing towards Buckley. It's odd. I don't know where to put Buckley now. I know he can beat guys with his power on a bad day, but I don't know where his skill level is at. And you can't really judge a fighter and where they sort of end up in the whole hierarchy of fighting in the rankings without knowing how skilled they are. And that's still something I don't have the answer to when it comes to Joaquin Buckley. For Chirico, great fight IQ, I think. And the fact that he normally is sort of that grinding style, he'll get you up against the cage, he'll throw some punches, he'll try to take you down, just be that rinse and repeat kind of style. I was surprised. I was really impressed. But again, this is like you had mentioned it for the last fight. this more diminished what Joaquin Buckley could have been than really boosted the profile of Alessio de Chirico. And might have been the worst post-fight press conference ever by old Alessio, because he went up there and he goes, guys, I think it's wrong that you don't interview the losers. That is my message. Goodbye. And he just like puts the mic down and leaves 40 seconds into his interview. You just knocked out one of the biggest viral stars of the year, and you decided to use your best chance to promote yourself as, hey guys, I think people who get knocked out should also get interviewed. I don't know if you should see that post-fight interview between Overeem and Joe Rogan again. It's not a great idea. So it was a weird hill to die on for old Alessio, but just that fight was odd. There were so many strange things about that fight. I'd love to get your thoughts on it, though.
It was weird. And not for nothing, when he said that, he didn't know the guy was not going to be interviewed anyway. I'm sure that he wasn't, but he didn't know for sure. So anyway, let's talk about Buckley in this way. I'm wondering if this was a blessing in disguise. And, is it better that he have sort of this humbling experience and that the narrative now is not, can he get back to it? But I don't think anybody's, after last night, I don't think anybody's talking about the Matrix anymore. It's now he gets to just be a fighter and not a meme. You know what I'm saying? That's my question. Do you think that it's good that this happened so early on? Because listen, man, I've been waiting for Uriah Hall to do his tough spinning head kick since it happened, right? So these things tend to stick with you. So do you think that it helped him at all? I mean, nobody's going to root for a loss, but sometimes they're
no,
good.
exactly. See, the only pushback I would have on that, and I do agree with you. Normally, again, this is what I love about MMA way more than boxing. In boxing, a loss is like, hey, you messed up. In MMA, a loss, and I hate this because it's overused, but I like how MMA does have that you win and you learn kind of mindset. And for Buckley, though, I assume the Kevin Holland fight would have been that opportunity for him because we haven't seen major progresses in his style ever since. Again, goodness. There was that beautiful knockout over Kasenganai, but that was sort of the outlier in the fight. Normally what Joaquin Buckley does, he has good boxing, he has great hand speed, really big power, and he can throw a really nice kick to the body. I think the kick just sort of muddied what people thought he was good at to begin with. For Buckley, you have good boxing, you have the speed, you have the power advantage of most guys. I would work more to refine my skill than just go out there and try to bum rush everyone. And the Kevin Holland fight, Kevin Holland beat him by being more technical than him. De Chirico beat him by being more technical than him. And it really comes down to that. I don't know how good the technique of Joaquin Buckley is. I know he can score a crazy knockout. I know he can get a knockout. I don't know if he can work behind the jab, use leg kicks, start going hooks to the body. Like, there's just so much more that I need to see from him before I'm willing to really make any sort of prediction about what the second half of his career is going to look like.
Yeah. All right, man. Punahele Soriano thinks it's batting practice all game long because he is swinging for the parking lot every time he's up to the plate. Saturday night was no different as he found a hole in Dusko Todorovic's game that allowed his left hand through, and then Soriano spent the rest of the first round alternating between making Todorovic forget about the left and reminding him of it until Todorovic had nothing left to give. That's what I saw. What'd you see?
That fight was insane. And I really thought Dusko's interesting because his whole game plan is built around getting his opponent to the cage. And once he does that, he can sort of eliminate a lot of variables. He's either going to punch you to the body, punch you to the head, or take you down. And it really just matters where you put your hands in the first place, and he'll take advantage of sort of what his opponent gives him. I hated that first pullback he did with his hands down. And the commentary was like, oh, look at that head movement, look at that head movement. If you've watched enough MMA and the guy doing that head movement isn't either Max Holloway or Anderson Silva, I don't normally like that head movement. And the fact that he kept on going to the well. The great thing about Max Holloway, and Craig and I were talking about this today, the L steps that he's constantly doing. He'll be in your range and he's going to step out and change the angle, step out, change the angle. For goodness, excuse me. In this fight, it was odd because Punahele kept on going forward, but Dusko didn't change his defense at all. He wasn't threatening a takedown after you throw a big punch, or he wasn't pulling off to a different side or pulling his hands up or throwing anything back. It was just, I'll keep on being like Fat Joe, lean back, lean back, lean back. And eventually that's going to get you caught no matter who you are. I do think this is one of those cases where it was more of a tactical error, if you will, on Dusko's part than it was a massive win over Punahele Soriano's fight. Because for Punahele, you know what you're going to get. That guy can knock out anyone on any given day. I was just really disappointed with what Dusko had showed me because personally, I had really high hopes for his career. And I do still think his ceiling's high, but that diminished where I think he can go further on in the sport for sure.
Yeah, I noticed that too. So here's something I learned very early on in getting into fight stuff and training a little bit myself is that, you protect your head with your arms and with your legs, not with your head. Meaning I'm all for head movement, but I'm all for head movement that's generated in your legs, right? You're bending your legs, you're bending your hips. You're not just moving your head, because when you do the pullback like that, and I get it, but really you should be pulling your entire body back to suck somebody into a punch. It's far too dangerous, first of all, in not knowing, one, how many combinations or how many punches are coming in a given combination, to know that you can trust, okay, if this guy throws a hook, I feel like I have the distance figured out well enough to get out of the way of the hook. Yeah, you might, but you can't get away from the right hand that follows it or the left that follows that. I just think it's a dangerous game to get into, and obviously he paid for it in the long run. Here's a question I ask you about a lot of fighters, but I think it's a relevant question. When you look at Soriano, do you see a guy with top 10, top 5 talent or potential, or do you just see a guy, and this is an old guy, so if this guy is in front of mind for you, maybe you can give me a comparison that's more front of mind for you, but a guy like Leonard Garcia, who fought in the WEC, fought in the UFC, you knew when you saw him, you were going to get a good fight, but you never thought it was going to be at the top of a main event. You never thought he was going to be fighting for belts. That's not what you thought you were going to get in Leonard Garcia. Is that what
Nico Price theory?
What's that?
It's my Nico Price theory. You don't have to be champ, and you can still become famous. Like, Leonard Garcia is the perfect comp, too. That was a great call. Because Leonard Garcia, he had the crazy fight against Zombie. He had the fight against Holloway. Like, he's just been in there with so many good guys, too.
He's had some crazy, yeah.
Exactly, and they all were great, too. And, again, Nico Price, like, there's a lot of guys out there who I look at them and I'm like, okay, maybe they're not going to be champ, but to me that doesn't really matter. Like, not everyone could be the first option of a basketball team. You need other guys. I understand this is an individual sport, but sometimes you just need guys in the top 15, and that sounds terrible, but could be another good example. Like, I kind of see Wonder Boy right now is just kind of a guy. Like, yes, he beat Jeff Neal, but Jeff Neal was so much further down in the ranks from him. He started in this weird purgatory in the division, where right now Wonder Boy just kind of a guy. And I understand he had done so many great things in his career, but for Soriano, I see him on his best day. He can play upset like he just did over the weekend. Like, he can knock anyone out. You see the power he has. His strikes aren't bad, but again, what you had mentioned too about Dusko's head movement, the fact that he just kept on doing the same thing over and over and over again, and Soriano wasn't really taking advantage of it. Soriano kept on throwing the same strike. It just, the strike landed at a certain point. So I think,
listen, go ahead.
No. I just think I agree with you. Soriano on his best day, I do think he could knock out let's say a Brad Tavares, for instance, who, maybe they were in the top 15 for a little while, one of those fringe guys, not always in there. I think he can get good wins on his resume. But when you look at his overall skill set, he's a good wrestler. We just don't really get to see it a lot. And he relies a lot on the power in his hands. When you look at 185, once you get to the top of that division, you need a lot more than power in your hands and decent wrestling. So I think he'd be a guy who could stay around the division for a long time. We might see him 15-10 for a little while, but I personally don't see him going, making it to the elite at 185.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys like that, right? I mean, Vicente Luque may never fight for a belt. Beneil Dariush may never fight for a belt. You mentioned Brad Tavares. He's another one of these guys. Brian Barberina was a great example of a guy who just always gave you a good fight, but wasn't necessarily ever going to be in a belt. He was just the guy that you put in there to see what you got. Like, is this guy going to wilt under I think either, I mean, I've said this for a while, so I don't know if it was when I was talking to Keith or Craig or whoever, just these professional fighters, right? I think a guy like Soriano is more of a gunner who just comes out there looking to bang. But there's these guys that are just like, listen, it's not going to be an easy night for you tonight, buddy. If you want to go get to a belt, I'm a guy you got to go through. I'm a guy that you got to prove. Brad Tavares was kind of that for Israel Adesanya. Just I'm this box you got to check, right? And that may be
100%.
That may be what Punahele Soriano is. All right, let's move on to the prelims. We'll start with Jocelyn Edwards Lab Oriel defeating Wu Yanan by unanimous decision. Couple 30-27, 29-28. You got anything here?
Jocelyn Edwards, the winner in this fight, looked phenomenal. And Craig and I are both really high on her. And Craig got me onto some of her, previous fights before she came into the UFC. Really good finisher. And you don't see that often at women's flyweight. But she goes in there looking for the finish the majority of the time. Really nice striking. Really good on the outside, too. And it's weird. Wu Yanan was the favorite over Betch Correia. They were supposed to fight yesterday. Edwards steps in on short notice. So she's the favorite over Betch Correia, someone who, listen, skill-wise, maybe not the best fighter ever, but she's been in there with the best. She has really high level experience on her side. And the fact that Wu Yanan was the favorite really tells you a lot about the fact that Edwards was able to go in there and beat her. She looked good on the feet. She looked good on the ground. The only thing I'll say, though, is Edwards has a few moments where she just seems, I don't want to say lost, but she just doesn't really know what to do with herself at different ranges. And that's something that can be easily fixed. It's sort of the in-betweens, but she'll land a combination or whatnot, and then she'll just kind of reset. But it's not a traditional reset where you see a lot of fighters that like take a step back, and you notice a lot. You ever see a fighter that like pull up their shorts? Like that's their way of like, okay, I'm out of range. This is my like reset motion. For Edwards, it's just kind of like, don't do anything for a second. It's a really unique aspect of her game, but I have high hopes for her in the future. If you could beat someone like Wu Yanan, and again, this was one of those, we're going to match up two prospects, see who's better right now kind of fight. But she went out there, had a great performance, and I do see her as a perennial top 15 kind of woman.
Let's move on. Carlos Felipe defeated Justin Tafa via split decision. Couple 29-28s, 28-29 for Tafa. What'd you have here?
This was fight of the night. And I don't think that's a hot take at all. Carlos Felipe and Justin Tafa was your fight of the night. And I can tell you this for one reason alone. You know what you never see in MMA? Two guys put their hands up, get into a shell, and go forehead to forehead and just start ripping each other with body shots. That's what this fight was. Like, it wasn't that great until the third round. But in the third round, Carlos Felipe and Justin Tafa did that. They went forehead to forehead and just started landing boxing combinations. And I don't know if you've ever done it or seen people do it. That boxing drill where two people put their foot in a tire, you just take turns, like I throw my combination, you throw your combination. It's kind of what that fight felt like near the end of it. Craig and I make fun of it. Heavyweight is the best and worst division. The first round of most heavyweight fights, great. The second and third round of most heavyweight fights, not so much. But this fight really kept its action throughout all three rounds. Really good win. Bit of a controversial finish. I know some people had Tafa winning. Personally, I thought Felipe did enough in the second and third round to get the decision, but I was actually really impressed by the performance. And Carlos Felipe, to me, again, I don't see him being a champ, but I see him in that kind of Marcin Tabora category where it's, listen, if you have a guy who you're really high on, you don't want him to fight Carlos Felipe. But if there's a guy in the top 15 who's already a little bit established, I can't see Felipe ever really getting over the hump and beating them. But he could be one of those, like, I'll just beat all the guys in the Contender Series every other day kind of guy for a really long time in the UFC. Fun style, decent personality. He's very polarizing, I guess, if you will. And in MMA, that might be the best thing to have. So I'm really high on Carlos Felipe moving forward.
All right, moving on. Ramazan Emeev defeated David Zawada via split decision, 28-29, a couple 29-28s. What'd you have here?
I don't know if the judge who gave it to Zawada just wasn't paying attention. I thought Ramazan Emeev ran away with this fight. His striking looked good, and I was joking on our prediction show. Ramazan Emeev, I'm pretty sure his contract, he must get paid by the hour, not by the fight, because that man does not mind fighting 15 minutes. And his style is one of those classic, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to try to take you down, you're going to get back up just so I can take you down again. And it must be extremely frustrating fighting a guy like that who is so high level at wrestling that any little mismanagement of your body weight, he can take advantage of it. Zawada, Craig and I used to call it the Louis Smolka effect all the time. Zawada does have good jiu-jitsu. He just seemed too comfortable at certain positions, and he was working to get back up to his feet. But the thing I hate seeing in MMA more than anything is when fighters throw strikes off of their backs. If your name isn't Tony Ferguson, don't do it. Use all that energy to either get back up to your feet or threaten with a submission or go for a sweep. The worst use of your energy and time is spent trying to attack the person on top. And I know, but Michael Bisping cut up GSP, and there is a handful of examples out there, but 99 times out of 100, I should say, you should be working to get back up to your feet. And Michael Bisping's really the one who hammered this home for me. When Poirier fought Dan Hooker and he kept on jumping guillotine, Michael Bisping's like, listen, I had an unwritten rule where I can go for 3 submissions in a round, and that's it. Like, I will give myself that amount of grace, and if I can't get any of those 3, it's over. I'm only focusing on getting back up to my feet. And I thought that was interesting because you don't hear a lot of fighters' game plan of what happens if you do get taken down. A lot of fighters are, I'll get back up to my feet. I like how we had sort of explained it a little bit further of, okay, I give myself an allowance of how many sort of riskier techniques I can go for, give myself a certain time period of, okay, I give up this top position, but then I got to work to get back up to my feet. And for Zawada, I understand he's got the submissions off his back. Just a lack of urgency, I guess, as the fight went on. I don't think it should have been split decision. It was pretty one-sided for Emeev.
Vanessa Melo defeated Sarah Moras via unanimous decision, 30-27, 229-28. What you got here?
I mean, Sarah Morris's record's 5-7, so that tells you something about that fight. It wasn't the best fight ever. Craig and I thought Moras was the more credentialed wrestler out of the two, and a lot of the times in lower level MMA fights, the better wrestler will just tend to win. You can just sort of overpower whatever your opponent's doing. Vanessa Melo did a good job, stayed on her bike. She at least secured herself in the UFC. This really felt like it was one of those loser goes home types. Jeff Hardy, CM Punk style. But Vanessa Melo, she keeps her job. Great job by her. Just Sarah Moras is like Derek Favors. She always just, I expected more. Like Derek Favors, oh, wow, he's a wing. He's got size. Wait, he can post up. Like you look at the components of his game and you're like, damn, there should be something impressive here. But for Moras, she's never able to put everything together. Her wrestling is decent. Her striking leaves quite a bit to be desired, but she never improved upon it in the first place. So it was a good win for Melo, but we didn't learn about either one of them very much in that.
Austin Lingo defeated Jacob Kilburn via unanimous decision. A couple 30-26s and a 30-27. What you got in this one?
I mean, this was your fight of the night until Justin Tafa, Carlos Felipe. Shout out to those guys who really deserved the 50K. Lingo looked good, and Kilburn, listen, he hasn't had a great UFC run. He is 8-4 now, and you look at sort of Jacob Kilburn's another guy, and I hate to say this too. I expected more. He came in off that Billy Quarantillo win loss, and I understand you can lose to Quarantillo, and when you just look at the stats of that fight, he gets beat very badly. But I thought there was at least moments in the fight, and I'm big on that now. I'm big on moments. Like, if you lose a fight, but you at least had a 2-minute stretch, there's a lot of positives to take from it. I can at least use that in the future when I'm trying to predict your fight. For Kilburn, okay, so you get washed by Quarantillo. Lingo kind of did the same, just really landed a lot of power shots on him. Again, great win for Lingo, but Kilburn leaves a lot to be desired. So it's not like this is one of those wins that's like, wow, you're on the main card next.
All right, Matt, let's move on to the wrap. Let's get some housekeeping done. Fight of the night was Max Holloway and Calvin Kattar. Both guys got 50 grand. You said a couple things, obviously, throughout the episode where you argued with this. Would you how do you take care of Max and not Calvin? So let's go through this whole thing and you tell me how you would have given out the money. So again, Max Holloway and Calvin Kattar, fight of the night. Performance of the night, Jingliang Lee, 50,000 to him. Performance of the night, Alessio de Chirico, 50,000 to him. So how would you change the performance bonuses?
So again, personally, I'm a big fan of when the UFC gives performance bonuses for guys who just mop the other guy in 5 rounds. Like RDA, Anthony Pettis, I bring this up all the time. That was the first time I can really remember the UFC being like, well, he didn't finish him, but like you can't do any better than that. We might as well give him 50 grand. And that was just a decision. I'm a big believer in sometimes a guy can win a decision, and that was still the best performance of the night. I think Max Holloway, you have to give him that. And I understand it's not like Kattar wasn't landing strikes, but when you really look at that fight, no one's going to remember the strikes that Kattar landed or the fact that it was fight of the night. Everyone's going to remember the record-breaking numbers of Max Holloway and how he kind of punked Kattar while he beat him. So I would go performance of the night, Max Holloway. I do either fight of the night. You could go co-main event if you wanted to, but personally, I would give it to Felipe and Tafa. And for the other performance of the night, I'm cool with them giving it to Jingliang. They'll win over Ponzinibbio. The fact that it was a guy who's not only been ranked, but headline shows for the UFC, the fact that he knocked him out in the first round, I think that deserves 50K.
All right, let's move on to the Victory Lab. This is where Matt tells us where he was right. Let's take some time. You hit the home run, you go around, you walk around the bases, you take your time. What are some of the predictions you feel like you absolutely nailed?
Okay, Max Holloway, Calvin Kattar. I don't know why people think when there's two people who do the same thing, it's going to be competitive. And the fight that stands out in my mind for this is Tatiana Suarez, Carla Esparza. It was, Suarez is this great wrestler. She's an Olympian. Carla, wrestled in high school, though. She's pretty good at wrestling herself. And it's like, okay, that just means that you're going to be doing what the other person's really good at. Like, you're not even going to be defending what they're good at. You're going to play into their game plan. If you have one guy who is good at boxing and another guy who is great at boxing, and I didn't even think of it just for boxing, Holloway throws kicks, Kattar doesn't. That itself is enough for me to pick Max Holloway. Also, the fact that if the fight hit the ground, Max Holloway is definitely the better grappler out of these two. I just didn't really see an avenue for Kattar to win. And my new thing is, if the only way for a guy to win is, can he knock him out? I'm never picking them again. And it really felt like that with Kattar for me. You're not going to beat Max Holloway by decision unless you can really put it on him early. And like Dustin Poirier was able to do that. But that's one of the best fighters in the world. Like, he's pound for pound, and he doesn't even have a belt. So the fact that people thought Kattar was going to be able to go in there and beat Holloway, I thought it was a little ridiculous. But again, I picked a favorite. It's not that big of a pat on my back. Carlos Condit, Matt Brown, predicted a lot more grappling in that fight. Kind of happy it turned into a bit of a grappling fest. I did think Condit was going to win. I got 3 underdogs wrong in a row. That wasn't great. Happy that Jocelyn Edwards got the win. Again, it's always nice to see a UFC newcomer show you things that you expect out of a veteran. And I really thought we saw that out of Edwards. Her distance management was really good throughout that fight. Carlos Felipe, sure, Carlos Felipe. People just remember him for not being able to fight as early as he wanted to because he may have admitted to taking banned substances outside the UFC before he got signed. And USADA didn't suspend him. They just sort of kept him in timeout. He put on a great performance, and he's been looking better. He beat Yorgan de Castro in his last fight. NEF veteran. Craig's seen him live a few times, but he beats Justin Tafa. You don't learn a lot when you beat Yorgan de Castro. De Castro had a few good moments. Beating Justin Tafa, I'm not going to say it puts you up in the ranks, but Justin Tafa fights basically like a Tai Tuivasa. So I'm not just saying that because they're from the same place. He throws a lot of hard leg kicks. He throws big overhands. And that's what a lot of guys at heavyweight are going to show you. So if you can beat a guy who is powerful and has a good repertoire of strikes, I think you can beat a lot of guys at heavyweight. So I was really impressed with Carlos Felipe in that fight. Thought it was really nice. And last one, Austin Lingo. Craig and I were both pretty high on Lingo going into that fight. And the fact that he just beat the brakes off poor Jacob Kilburn wasn't overly impressive. But all in all, I would say this was an average card prediction-wise. Got some right, got some wrong, but that's how it goes.
What surprised you the most? What's the thing? We always talk about this as like, what did Matt get right? What did Matt get wrong kind of thing. I don't like it like that. What more like, what were you surprised by? Where you're like, there's no way I saw that coming. The Ponzinibbio fight, obviously.
Yeah, it's obviously the Ponzinibbio one, but just going outside of that, because that is a bit of an obvious pick, I was surprised by the grappling of Carlos Condit. I mean that as a positive. Now, normally we use this portion as a negative, but I really like the foot control and the ankle control he was showing on Matt Brown. That's something that Carlos Condit's big weakness is. It's not that he's bad on the ground by any means. He's just bad at getting back up to his feet and preventing the other person's transitions. Where against Matt Brown, and again, Matt Brown, he's not a great grappler, but these are building blocks. And it's wild that we're saying building blocks when this guy wasn't interim champ not that long ago, or I guess it was a long time ago now. But he showed that, okay, you're going to need more than just wrestling to beat me. And I thought that was impressive. Like, you do need that second step, if you will. You do need, the black belt in jiu-jitsu, or you do need the heavy collegiate credentials. I was impressed by Connor's grappling in that one.
All right, let's move on to who you think won the night. I mean, there's obviously some obvious picks here. I'll give it to you first, and then I'll tell you what I think.
Max Holloway was on ABC, one of the biggest networks on TV. Not only put on one of the best individual performances you're ever going to see inside the cage, set numerous amounts of records, and also became viral all while doing it. It's pretty hard to get picked against Max Holloway. Max Holloway might be the biggest winner of the week. Like,
it's impossible to pick against him. Go ahead.
Just last thing for me. I like the call out. Of course, he's not going to get it. Like, there's no way we're seeing Max Holloway fight Dustin O'Connor next weekend. The fact that he at least got his name out there with them, though, and to you and me, we both know by the time he gets cleared for medicals, like, there's no way that fight could ever get put together. But just to the casual audience who is watching on ABC, and you're like, wow, that guy was willing to put on a performance like that. He just fought 5 crazy rounds, and he's willing to fight a Poirier or a Conor next. I just think, when you're looking at casual growth in MMA, Max Holloway boosted his profile more than anyone else on that card tenfold.
It was his night for all the reasons you just said. And the one thing that I thought was interesting, the kid goes to the desk in the post-fight show and he's holding court. The line that he had for DC, that is going to be a Conor level line where he called DC out for a fight. And then he said, "You're eating everything I worked for," which is a great line that immediately you make the connection to Nate Diaz. Like, it's a great line. I just think that he could do no wrong last night. And I think that from that perspective, you're right. If you're going to have a night where you could do no wrong, you could probably do a hell of a lot worse than doing it on ABC, right? You're on the main network. There's all this history. It's done at a time where people are kind of getting like, you're competing with some football, but it's before the big later night game. So he was kind of in a nice little window where he really could have done well for himself. I think he did. All right, let's talk about the broadcast real quick. This Daniel Cormier, John Anik, Dan Hardy thing. What do you think about it?
Okay, it's weird because there was definitely inaccuracies in some of the facts that they brought up. Like, there was just a couple times for DC, he might have said like the wrong opponent that a guy had in their last fight or whatever. That happens. It did stand out to me a couple of times. I like the group. Again, my ideal trio is probably DC, John Gooden, Dan Hardy. That would be a great trio. If they just did that forever, I'd be really happy with it. I love the DC Dan Hardy dynamic. Really, there's no one who I dislike with Daniel Cormier. Like, him and Cruz don't mesh all that well together, and him and Rogan can get a little annoying together. But I don't know Daniel Cormier. I'm assuming I'd want to be friends with him if I did know him, though. He just gives off that energy. And I thought it was a really good booth. I like when you have sort of the professionalism of Anik, but he will play that, I'll kind of joke around card. It's same thing with Dan Hardy, too. He keeps a very good balance of like, okay, it's time to be fun, and it's time to get the facts about the fight right.
Yeah, I think Hardy's really establishing himself as an amazing analyst. I mean, he's doing work. He's the European version of Dominic Cruz. I think for DC's the guy, we all have that friend where, like, if you're going to take him to the house of another friend, you don't have to worry. Some friends you do. You're like, I should probably give everybody a heads up about who's coming. And another guys, you're like, he's fine. He'll just show up, and I don't need to, babysit him. He'll just go off at this party, and there won't be any problems. That's DC. DC kind of works with everybody, All right, I want to talk lastly before we get out of here about the Khabib announcement, because it was a little bit much ado about nothing. I feel like it's just kind of Khabib and Dana winking at each other. Like, hey, you help me do this thing, and I'll help you do that thing. It's got a little bit of a Ocean's 11 vibe to it, where the guy says, I still owe you for the thing with the guy in the place. That's kind of what I think Dana and Khabib are up to right now. Do you think there's any legitimacy to, if Conor or Dustin look amazing, Khabib will take the fight, or do you think he's just helping Dana put a good number on that pay-per-view next Saturday?
It's interesting because if Dana White had just come out and stuck to the script of he might fight, he's just looking for something to really get him out of bed, I would have agreed to it. The problem that Dana White made, though, was in the post-fight press conference, someone had asked, and I forgive whatever reporter it was who had asked, but they had said, did GSP's name ever come up with Khabib? And if you've read anything about Khabib, that's really the only fight he wants. It's the only fight that can boost his legacy at this point. He's 29-0. He's beaten everyone. No one's even really had a competitive fight with him. GSP is the one name that he has always called for. And Dana White said, no, his name didn't even come up. I'm calling BS on that. There's no way that Khabib's willing to fight Charles Oliveira and not willing to fight George St. Pierre. I think this is just the UFC's way of trying to save face. And like the whole, we're doing the announcement like LeBron. Your answer to the announcement can't be, well, maybe he comes back. Like, I haven't been that disappointed, and it's been a minute. I would just like a clear answer. It's either, yes, we plan on having him come back. He'll be in attendance, let's say next weekend. And, hopefully we'll get something made in the near future, or just no, he's decided to retire. Because we both know, even if they come out and say, no, he's just decided to retire, that doesn't close a single door in the world of MMA.
I got some insight recently. I was telling Craig about this the other day, that I was on with Shaquille Majuri on 1-2 Punch, and this guy in the comments said something that just, I've been listening to Dana talk for a long time, and there was a while where I just realized, okay, everything that he's saying is misdirection, so there's no sense in listening to him anymore. So I went away from listening to post-fight pressers. He stopped doing scrums anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. But one of the things this guy said that kind of opened my eyes was about the streaming thing. He said that Dana just needs for you to believe that he's going to prosecute you for streaming next Saturday. A month from now, 2 months from now, 6 months from now, Dana's not Elliot Ness, right? He's not going after Al Capone when it comes to streamers. He just wants to make sure that he has a clear runway for the Conor Dustin fight in a lot of respects. So now if you look at it, and I've been comparing Dana to Trump for a while, and this is where the comparison comes. It's that they will say whatever they need to say in the moment to accomplish the short-term goal they need to accomplish, right? If Donald Trump wants the stock market to go up, he'll say something to make the stock market go up. It doesn't mean that's what he's going to do. It means that's what he's saying to make these dominoes fall. I think that's what Dana's doing here, and I think he's using Khabib to help him. And I think that the payoff for Khabib is going to be that Eagle Fighting Championships is going to get some prominence in either on Fight Pass or, Khabib. Like, listen, before you knew it, Dana's tweeting out Dean Thomas, Matt Serra, Khabib Nurmagomedov, and Dana watching a fight with Eagle Fighting Championships behind them. My guess would be sooner than later we're going to see looking for a fight with Khabib on it. And, some prominence of Eagle Fighting in some way. Their brand, maybe their promotion on the mat, in the octagon, something of that nature. But, yeah, I think it's a lot of it was disappointing. I was hoping Khabib was going to take his talents to, the Apex or whatever, the fight. Listen, where the Khabib thing gets really interesting for me and the GSP thing is, I've been saying this for a long time. If I'm GSP, I don't care what anybody says. If I'm GSP, I only fight Khabib Nurmagomedov if he's a 155-pound champion and the fight is at 155 pounds. That 100%. Is the thing that separates GSP from everybody else. The third belt. You're beating Khabib either way. whether you do it at 65, 55, or 70. If you get the win, you're beating him either way. Why not get yourself a little weight cut, make 155. You're going to bulk back up to 170 or whatever. Anyway, that's the piece of hardware that's relevant. And I learned a long time ago from watching Chael Sonnen, and we'll sneak him in here before the end, that you got to figure out what is a guy's motivation, right? What matters?
Honestly, it's kind of funny you bring that up. Great segue into the main event of next weekend. That's the big question I have about Poirier fighting Conor. Like, Conor, yes, he's got all those millions in the bank account, but like, if you're Conor McGregor and you know you have all that money stashed away and you know the type of fights that Dustin Poirier brings to people, like, are you really willing to go through all of that just for like a couple more of what you've already got hundreds of? It's always interesting to me, especially with Khabib. And to bring in Michael Jordan, because you might as well keep on making sports references. In The Last Dance, Michael Jordan kept on. The whole point of that documentary is that when you're that good, you need to be motivated to really be your best. And he's saying how Karl Malone win an MVP made him the whole season, like, I'm going to destroy this guy in the finals, going to destroy this guy in the finals. It's not like anyone's talking about any opponents out there that have much of a chance against Khabib. Like, unless you are the biggest Conor McGregor fan and you just take whatever his word is with law, then yes, you're like, oh, you're scared and oh, he had a broken foot. And you can believe whatever excuse he makes up. But for Khabib, when he sits at home thinking about what kind of motivation he has to come back, in my mind, I agree with you 100%. It's either do the GSP fight, because right now we're pretty much 1-2 for, we'll say, non-PED GOATs, if you will. So if you could put that fight together, no matter who wins that fight is almost definitively the GOAT, even if the argument's out there that, oh, GSP, he was past his prime. Right now, they're pretty much head and head, if you want to say that. So whoever was able to get the win would probably become the all-time GOAT. I just don't know who would motivate Khabib enough to really want to dedicate himself to another full training camp without his primary coach being his father. It's just, there's so many different hurdles that Khabib would have to get over to come back into the cage. I don't see it happening.
Yeah, and I think that, we talk about the express lane or the fast lane or the fast pass like they do at Disneyland. Like, how do you get the most out of the least? The one hole that you can poke in Khabib's legacy is the resume. That's the one thing where it's like, he didn't fight on that many main cards, and there wasn't that many huge fights. GSP erases all of that. If he beats GSP, even late in GSP's career, he wipes all that away. All right, guys. There you have it. Another recap show is in the books. Matt, we got these 2 cards coming up. Talk about the timeline for the prediction videos, where folks can follow them, where folks can find them, what's coming up in the next week.
So we've got the prediction videos are already out for Chiesa versus Magny. The individual videos are out. Same thing with the long form. And then I believe as we speak, Craig is working on the long version of the Poirier versus McGregor. So hopefully either tomorrow or Tuesday, those should be coming out. And then the individual videos should be coming out either Tuesday or Wednesday. So it's been a busy week in the MMA world. It's been a great week, though, especially if you love the sport. And I'm just happy to be back talking about the sport we all love.
There you go. All right, guys. Obviously, we'll be recapping all the fights as they occur. We'll see you later. Enjoy the fights. Peace.